Nature was the source of mankind's earliest colors, and from there the first paintings were created. With the indisputable power of the earth's colors and a bold determination that astounds us to this day, whole picture cycles were created. Thousands of years before art became recognized as a generic term in our civilized society, early humans were recreating and expressing their inner self on the walls and ceilings of prehistoric caves. Some of the paintings, like those in Altamira and in Lascaux, are some 15 to 20,000 years old. Others, like those found in the Chavot Grotto, are even older, created 30,000 years ago. The impressive, vibrant depictions of animals were expressions of both fear and confidence alike. Watching their artistry through the flickering flames of early torches, we imagine our ancestors hoping to ward off evil ghosts or to conjure hunting bounties with their imagery. Using colors to chase away ghosts that block creativity is something not unusual even in modern society. Particularly artists can attest to the effort required to activate one's fantasy. Yet with the first magic strokes of a painter's brush, a spell or an artistic block can be lifted.
Das ist eine Sache, wie das Temperament eines Menschen ist.
Somehow it's like a human's character or temper. This might sound silly, but I see it as the flowering of the whole affair. So I can simply draw a seemingly pointless line. Now the situation has lost its first horror, like the black man entering the room. And now I can start, if I already have an idea, that is, painting something figural to it.
Das muss überhaupt nichts.
This does not evidently have to do anything with the final result of the picture, but this is, as said before, a very personal thing, how to fight the enemy in this particular situation. There are colleagues picking their noses, reflecting for hours and making sketches, which is good, and then approach their work very systematically, deconstruct the canvas and so on. However, this is not my thing. My thing is to get the idea and abolish all bad spirits, or white canvas in my case.
Look here, and a devil has been painted on the wall to cast out evil spirits. Elsewhere, a dragon is to be seen acting as a guardian to the room. Mexico's folkloric pantheon is populated by many such fantastic beings. The most colorful and joyful among them are the so-called alebrijes, incredibly imaginative, friendly monsters created out of paper mache.
Cuando mi abuelito
Pedro Linares Lopez, my grandfather, was its creator. It was in 1936 and he was badly ill, suffering from gastric ulcer. He got a very high fever and started to hallucinate. In his fever dreams, he saw how stones and trees would turn into strange but friendly creatures. Once he was healed, he began to create these creatures out of his memory. Today we call them alebrijes, a pure fantasy name.
The moment these feathery, fragile works of art were exposed to the world at large, they were adored. They were rapidly reproduced as they had no natural enemies. The original alebrijes, or those close to them, are in a museum and are treated as priceless works of folkloric art. Cheap replicas can be found at attractive prices anywhere.
Los alebrijes están en el mundo para...
Alebrijes are in this world to protect us. Rather in a spiritual than physical way, they can accompany us to places where we feel better. Surrounded by them, they put us into a state of tranquility, and can transfer us to a certain feeling of happiness. That's why they were created.
Así surgieron los alebrijes.
Dancing lions have the same responsibilities in Chinese culture. Where the Mexican dragon monsters were painted with a free expression of artistic creativity, these beasts are created following strict rules that have been laid down over centuries. Even the colors of their costumes adhere to specific laws. Yet as these lions dance with a fearsome wildness, the traditional codes set out by their costume expose them as friendly. Their fearsome appearance becomes defunct. For several years, supersized alebrijes have been available in Mexico. Encouraged by the deafening cries of the public, these huge monsters are even said to be able to prevent the monstrous traffic problems in the cities, as they are paraded down the streets during the annual festival, Desfile de Alebrijes. One comes across these screaming giants even outside of festivals. At the center of a main traffic crossing stands El Cabalito, the little horse. This steel horse's head was created by the Mexican sculptor Sebastián and has been praised by locals and tourists alike, even hailed as a local mascot. Not far from there stands the luxury hotel El Camino Real, where strict simplicity absorbs the usual Mexican colorfulness. Here, near minimalism makes an intellectual statement, something that cannot otherwise typically be constrained in daily life. Once again, a contrast. Coyoacán, the site of the coyotes. It is a district of artisans, intellectuals, and a generally wealthy middle class. For centuries, it used to be its own little town, where, among other things, it was supposedly home to Malinche. Malinche was the lover and interpreter of Hernán Cortés. In 1950, Coyoacán was simply eaten up by the Moloch of Mexico City. With its famous colorful houses and bars, Coyoacán, similar to La Boca in Buenos Aires, is a mixture of an arts and leisure district. Its history, nevertheless, contains more than its fair share of dramatic, bloody chapters. Leo Trotsky used to live here until his murder. And just a few blocks away, in Calle Londres, one finds the famous blue house, Casa Azul, that belonged to the tragic Frida Kahlo. Built in 1907, the same year as Frida's birth, the house seems like a refuge where one can escape the adversities of life, block out the noise of today's visitors, and one can imagine the peaceful oasis it once was. Frida grew up here and even came back towards the end of her life, afflicted by her incredible pains and the permanent discord she suffered with her husband. It is also a place where evil spirits were warded off with pictures. In 1958, 4 years after her death, the house was converted into a museum. For such an all-consuming injection of colors, there are often eccentric but also simple reasons. Due to his foible for the color blue, for example, the whole office of a particular Viennese accountant is blue, right down to the carpet tassels. This purveys a tranquil atmosphere, although initially the decision for this monocolor expanse had been coincidental.
Vielleicht aus Ersparnisgründen bin ich zu blau gekommen, denn ich wollte mir den Architekten ersparen.
Maybe due to a financial shortcut, I was trying to do the work in my office without an architect. I have discovered the color blue. I have taken blue as an idea from where it has spread all over my office. And somehow this blue has swapped over to the pictures. And so I have started to collect blue pictures. I have found such pictures from George Gross. Then I started to buy from Viennese artists who are still alive, until they realized that I was less interested in their actual work than in the color of their work. And they started to paint more blue pictures and presented only those to me anymore.
Since then, similar to Goethe's Creatures in the Sorcerer's Apprentice, the number of blue, useful or curious objects found in the office have increased rapidly and can be found nesting in niches, nooks and crannies. The theatre is another place where the beautiful attributes of color can be found. Using the miracle of light, they create an apparently infinite diversity of realities for our eyes.
With the help of colors, we can perceive all situations differentiated. We make use of this, the theatre, as a kind of language. In this way, we communicate scene pictures or costume pictures with the audience. This is very important. If I start a new project, I close my eyes to see a certain atmosphere, a color. We have to discuss this in the team, as everyone has their own expectations, and so one thinks of an emotion and then one enters the stage and sees that something completely different has been realized with it.
A dream is life, life is a dream. Who can determine that exactly in the ever-changing game of sentiments?
A certain picture always comes to my mind in this context, Picasso's La Guernica.
How true that less is more. It is exactly the missing color that makes the allegory of horror so haunting.
But once standing in front of it, with their spiritual eye, one can see the picture in individual colors because black and white do not exist on their own.
All attempts to create a colored version of La Guernica failed in light of the mesmerizing paleness of the original masterpiece and the fantasy of its beholder. Let us return to the theatre and the emperor's new clothes. In the costume workshops at the Salzburg Festival, new gowns and skirts, dresses and shirts are being created for characters from Mozart to Janacek, from Shakespeare to Handke. Colors are used to create an atmosphere, to express character, send messages. As a whole, these different spheres will then indicate the style the theatre piece will follow, the story it will tell. Yet the costume you see on the designer's table in the light of day may be very different to how it is experienced later on stage. Similar to ceramics before and after burning, theatre costumes owe their entire beauty to their illumination, to the artistry of a lighting technician. Bushes and trees play an important role in Verdi's Macbeth. They are carefully covered in specially selected variations of green. Once the stage lights project various colours onto them, a whole array of different hues will give the greens a new meaning. When the magic of a theatre evening has been created and built in a workshop, only the remaining scraps of material cast a glimpse of the dazzling fest that will transform the stage. Even now, the now discarded artists' utensils and scraps assume their own sense of identity within the world order. Colours can either come together in a work of art, wildly and uncontrolled, or they can be combined through strict, inflexible rules of law. Whether in the untamed free fall of fantasy or within the framework of tradition, to the eye of the beholder, colours always stimulate a sense of adventure. In the Palace Museum of Taipei, a particularly artistic form of colourful domestication is presented to the astonishment of both locals and foreign tourists. The instructions of how to create these carefully sculpted and painted ceramics underlies centuries of strict secrecy. This knowledge is subject to complex expertise, known only by a handful of specialists. Normally, however, we take the messages that are sent by colours very seriously. Much of this recognition takes place in our subconscious.
Ja, das kann man ja gleich, ohne dass man viel theoretisch herumreden.
We can do all that without a lot of theoretical talking around. So this is a sketch to a paraphrase about a 17th century picture by Antonio Porreda. It is about the allegory of transience and so on.
Und so weiter und so fort. Und das Bild ist im Originalzustand, so wie es in Wien.
And the picture is in its original condition, as one finds it at Vienna Kunsthistorisches Museum, is slightly dark, especially in the background and some objects in the front, as in the skull or the globe, highlighted by other colors.
Andere Farben hervorgehoben. Wenn ich jetzt hergehe, und daran arbeite ich jetzt gerade, und möchte
now I'd like to give the picture a completely different meaning.
Geben, ob's die Leute dann verstehen.
Whether or not people will understand it is a different story.
Wenn ich also jetzt aus dem dunklen Hintergrund so einen aggressiven Eislaufplatz der Farbe mache, also ich löse das Blau auf und gebe dem Ganzen hinten einen.
But if I now redo the dark background into an aggressively colourful ice ring, which means I dissolve the blue and give the whole background a reddish character in different red shadings, then the picture will be put directly into another cosmos.
Von einer, wenn man so will, meditativen Fläche zu einer.
Thus it goes from a meditative surface to a flamboyant, aggressive level of expression. That means if I use the red here instead of the initially used blue, the picture becomes something completely different, although the depicted thematic is the same.
Red was the first colour that was perceived at the beginning of culture. Red blood, red earth, red sky, red fire. And so red naturally became a symbol of power. From a relatively nondescript green, one of the most astonishing shades of red can be created. The cochineal louse infests as a parasite the cactus leaf. When they are squashed, an intense red color oozes out.
Entonces la cochinilla, cuando llega a Europa, es decir, desplaza al kermes, que era el colorante que usaba.
When the cochineal entered Europe, it replaced the scale or mealybug, used until then as a coloring, as the cochineal color is much stronger. In European museums, one can still see that before 1870, when synthetic colorings entered the market, all was colored with cochineal.
Todo está teñido de grana cochinilla, es decir, los uniformes napoleónicos.
Napoleon's uniforms, as well as those of English grenadiers. It was fixed by law to color them with Mexican cochineal.
La púrpura de los cardenales.
Even purple for the cardinals, later changed into red, was produced from cochineal. Concerning this, one finds an interesting connection with Austria. It was Emperor Maximilian who protected then the production of cochineal.
We will not consider it ironic that the church and military used the color of power for their purposes, for which billions of small lice had to be crushed on a cactus leaf. Theodora, the wife of Byzantine Emperor Justinian, was still, as were Rome's emperors and senators, obsessed with the much more expensive purple. She was so infatuated with this color of power that she even wanted to be wrapped and buried in it.
Die Roben der Herrscher waren ins Purpur getaucht und Purpur.
In former days, dresses of monarchs were dipped into purple. Due to its manufacturing, purple was by far one of the most prestigious colors. Besides the Pope's white, here again we find the situation of representing the highest instance of purity. No matter in what way interpreted, we find the cardinal's purple as the next lower level, followed by the bishop's violet. And this is perfectly correct according to the school of colors. The hangman's red stands in direct context with military and blood. In former days, military leaders were always dressed in red, both to provoke attention and because it leads over life and death. The close relation of blood and leadership has always been a proximity in history.
In this context, the otherwise very peaceful Cistercian abbey of Heiligenkreuz near Vienna could be considered a military town. Here lies the blood trail which leads to the Austrian coat of arms. In the Gothic stained glass windows of the pump room, you will find early depictions of red, white, red stripes, which became the emblem of a nation. This indicates that the close relationship Manfred Wagner conjugated between blood and rule can be underlined by the legend of the founding fathers of the Austrian national identity. The Babenberg Duke Leopold V, who is buried here. In July 1191, during the Third Crusade, at the siege of the fortress port of Acre, a severe and, for the Christian army, victorious battle occurred. It seems Leopold of Babenberg, later surprisingly nicknamed the Virtuous, played a particularly bloodthirsty role in the battle. As he stripped off this belt, in the evening, his whole clothing was supposedly soaked in blood. Only the middle, where his belt had been, was still white.
Red can signify anger and love. Red can represent blood and highest power. That means that the human learns, and I claim that he learns all colors by experience. He learns using them as they're being used in his surroundings.
Fez was a seat of royalty and a university town for thousands of years. Its historical center, with the oldest Islamic university, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and the spiritual center of Morocco. In the famous souk of the old town, A tannery and dyeing works has been in operation for centuries. Technology and chemistry has not changed since the days when carpets could still fly. Here, handicraft is not just a passing phrase, but craftsmanship is taken seriously. The very strong stench of the leather souk is nothing for the faint of heart. Its smell permeates from the earthen vats of the dyers and spreads throughout the souk. An unpleasant legacy that will leave a lasting impression on an inquisitive nose. The Catholic Church is an institution that places great emphasis on the meticulous coordination of their hierarchical use of color, exactly as was customary in the military in the past. The Church has always had an ambivalent relationship with the color red. On the one hand, the devil was presented as red. On the other, Jesus, as the world leader, was often seen to be clothed in a red coat. For a long time, the precious color purple, once used by the emperors of Rome, was a favorite of the cardinals. Probably for cost reasons, the once legendary cardinal purple was exchanged for a more conspicuous scarlet-like signal. From the power and the red of the cardinals, we go back in time to a distant culture, the realm of the pharaohs and the color blue. In the strictly formal sphere of Egyptian art, neither color nor form changed quickly. Thus, over centuries and dynasties, power and divinity were demonstrated in the temples, palaces, and tombs on the Nile by the color blue. The most expensive and intense color of the semi-precious stone, lapis lazuli, a blue that would later become a rarity in Western art, was reserved for the pharaoh. To come into possession of this godlike color, tremendous hardships had to be undergone and taken into account. Courageous traders and adventurers fought their way as far as the Hindu Kush for this semi-precious wonder. What was true at the time of the pharaohs holds true today. The route in the province of Badakhshan in northeastern Afghanistan is still as difficult and dangerous as ever. It wasn't until the lapis lazuli had been placed on the death mask of the young Tutankhamun that this mask became steeped in dignity.
Es ist eine wunderschöne Farbe und es war natürlich auch eine ganz besonders teure Farbe und aus diesem Grund also
It is a beautiful color and used to be a particularly expensive color. For this reason, everything that was expensive and prestigious was limited to pharaohs and emperors.
Der Biographenschreiber Vasari über Perugino weiß.
And there is an amusing story that the biography writer Vasari knew about Perugino. He had to paint frescoes for a monastery, and one gave him a small bag of lapis lazuli and put a young friar in charge of him in order to observe whether Perugino was using too much or putting some aside for himself.
Mary with Child and Two Holy Women was painted by Perugino between 1493 and 95. Red, green, and blue were the three major colors of Western religious art. In the Madonna of the Meadow, Raphael used this colorful triad which is obviously perceived by onlookers. The intellectual black of an unknown yet probably educated young man as depicted by Lorenzo Lotto. The seemingly delicate colors give viewers an essence of the smell of the young woman and the quiet sounds of peaceful nature. Very confident and perhaps arrogant because of his wealth, an unknown young man dressed in red by Lorenzo Lotto. The Three Philosophers by Giorgione in the History of Art Museum in Vienna is over 500 years old and one of the most enigmatic paintings in the entire history of art. As disputed as the classification of the three men is, so one finds the color of their clothes also a matter for contention. In many places in the Provence, but especially noticeable around the small towns of Roussillon and Rostrel, ochre has broken through the thin layer of topsoil. Bizarre forms contrast against the intense blue of the sky. In the glorious sunlight, the Earth's colors are celebrated in a myriad of harmonious shades. To draw the coveted color pigmentation from rock, it had to be broken up and ground down. Then several muddy procedures were followed in order to extract the pure pigment as a fine, almost floury material. Half-dismantled machinery and unused tools used to produce the Earth's colors. Stage designers and architects could not design a more harmonious interior themselves. In the Austrian National Library, an important manuscript is stored. Between 1100 and 1120, Rogerus from Helmershausen, a German monk, created a unique document called De Diversibus Artibus, in which he also mentions the production of color in great detail. Our sequence shows a part in which the author writes, amongst other things, about De Viridi Hispanico, known as Spanish green, and the production of green rust. Time seems to stand still in the small showroom of an established Viennese company. The manufacturer has produced and distributed painters' colors for more than 120 years.
Wir hatten also einige Unternehmen in Österreich, die Trockenfarben.
So we found some companies in Austria producing dry color according to the client's wishes. In so-called edge runners, they mixed colorful pigments purchased by the industry with substrate matters in these edge runners. And that led to the assortment which results here in this diversity, because it is not a color, but a mixture with white pigments and etc., etc.
Die Basisstoffe, die Buntheit entstand sicherlich im
The basic substances, colorfulness, must have come in connection with the BASF, that then have created a number of annulant substances in greater amounts, because before that we had mostly relied on natural color substances. It is not a surprise that the color sienna is named after the earth from the area around Siena. Ochre came from France, a lot of reddish colors from Italy. Earth colors, natural colors, were made available for use by fine milling.
Colors do not only affect our daily life in a beautiful, comfortable, entertaining, or exciting way. They are also present in our lives in the most objective of manners. The industrial production of today's synthetic colors cannot be compared with the dangerous handling of raw materials in times gone by.
We are varnish formulators, not varnish chemists. There are two professions, varnish chemist and varnish technician. However, at the bottom of our heart, we are varnish formulators. We have a palette of raw materials at our disposition. In former days, maybe 2,000. Today, about 40,000. And those are being combined. The profound knowledge of all varnish chemists, technicians, or formulators lie in the knowledge of the raw material. I tend to compare it to a cook who needs to know the ingredients and how he can combine them.
The idea of a cook mixing different basic ingredients to create colors has a level of symbolism akin to witchcraft. Reflecting the old-fashioned idea of an evil witch's brew, many of the substances used for color production were highly poisonous. A prime example of this is white lead. In former times, frequent use of this material led many artists and craftsmen to pay with their lives. Nowadays, the paint industry has left the days of toxic substances far behind it and offers more harmless materials that can be used by humans and are gentle on the environment.
Wir machen angewandte Entwicklung, wir entwickeln Produkte.
We do applied development. We develop plans adapted to requirements that we have. Then we adapt the requirements concerning maintenance, durability, and so on, which all demands a lot of intuition.
Although one must say the handling of modern industrial paint is nothing for the faint-hearted, under simulated extreme weather conditions, these materials have to prove the durability of their protectional abilities and strength of color. Under a bridge over the river Salzach, one has tried to give the arches a coat of paint that is supposed to act as a camouflage. In other public places, albeit tentatively, one can notice an increased courage to use stronger statement colors. Industrial buildings and facades no longer have to follow a dreary, desolate color code, commonly used for such a long period. Color and paint dealers in urban and rural areas are trying not only to meet customer needs, but also play a consultative role. As well as exact industrial knowledge, empathy, taste, and creativity are required. Clients who have decided to give their beloved home a brand new look make decisions that have far-reaching implications beyond even their imagination. Therefore, it is important that the color expert not only knows about the chemical attributes of color, but also what psychological effects color can have if they are chosen appropriately or not. Roussillon in the French Provence is as picture-perfect a town as they come. You would not find anything better in the best tourist magazines, surrounded by lavender and sunflower fields and the bizarre formations of the neighboring ochre rocks. It could do nothing more than show itself from its most colorful side. Regardless of how the advertising world splashes color across our existence with opulent pictures depicting joy and freedom, we Europeans, particularly Central Europeans, consistently fight against the use of color. Our clothes are a particular reflection of this, as we choose dark, muted tones. With seemingly simple road markings, highest demands are required today. They must endure enormous stress, abrasion, and temperature fluctuations while remaining relatively visible for sustained periods. Moreover, they should not be detrimental to the environment and be cheap. Let us imagine a world without traffic control systems. Without them, anarchy would break out in most parts of the world. There are seemingly places, even entire regions, where, whether as a sign, street marking, or lighting signals, traffic regulators seem to be a joyful expression of local folklore and traditions. From the hectic stimuli of optical artificiality back to the clear, calm purism of Earth's colors. In the haptic employment of trying to understand these things, we understand the double meaning of the word Earth. The Conservatoire des Ochres et Pigments Appliqués in Roussillon makes sure that the craft of using ochre is not forgotten. Seminars are held here regularly. At these masterclasses, laymen and professionals who come from all over Europe and also from overseas deepen and further their understanding in creating authentic and earthbound colors.
Par exemple, le noir de charbon, c'est un pigment tiré de la calcination de la vigne en général, le sarment de vigne.
The painting housewife, however, attending her 5th aquarelle class in Zycanthos or the Waldviertel, dedicates herself to the colors. Oh my God, what a beautiful day it has been, and ta-ta-ta. Any painter, more or less reasonable, equally to composers or writers, performs a fight with this medium. This is not funny, and if someone asks, at the inauguration of the exposition, have you felt pleasure when creating it, he is dead for me, and he doesn't understand anything about the matter.
For hundreds of years, artists around the world have followed this method and used the power of the earth to create the fire in their colors. From the early history of time through to antiquity, to the Middle Ages, ochre, in all its variations, from red to yellow to pale green, was one of the most important dyes used to express art. It is almost as if one will watch a cook or a rustic pâtissier create a beautiful delicatessen cream from grandmother's recipe.
Donc ça, c'est vous qui, si vous faites de la peinture, hein, c'est vous qui diluez comme vous voulez. Alors, les anciennes couleurs d'ocre, les ocres du Vaucluse, hein, on peut trouver ici.
Nowadays, we get 11 different colors from the ochre around us. Strictly speaking, though, it is always the same basic color that we extract from the earth, but in different nuances.
Et l'usine est à Apt. De nos jours, dans le Vaucluse, on
This can vary through from site to site in the same area, almost invisible, from yellow to some brownish nuances to red. They form the same color nuances as in the past. Then there are still a few colors we do not use anymore as they contain toxic elements.
Du blanc de plomb, du jaune indien, du cinabre. Tout ça, ce sont des couleurs, le vermillon.
But meanwhile, one can produce them synthetically and toxic-free. For instance, white, Indian yellow, or cinnabar red.
Pigment historique.
There is hardly a province in Europe that can compete when it comes to the natural, sensual triad of color, landscape and smell found in the lavender region of the Provence. Fields stretch over gentle hills and ridges as far as the eye can see, offering variations of blues and purples. From the slopes of the Mont Ventoux, the lavender crop cultivation stretches to the northwest as far as Valence, and in the east, even towards the periphery of Grasse. Wild lavender has been growing in the south of France forever. What is grown here, however, is only a crop plant, cultivated for the extraction of essential oils, for perfume essences. As a byproduct, one extracts the popular aromatic essence, lavender water, at the same time. Whoever gets fed up of the quiet, indolent tranquility of the mono-colored lavender region, or who has had enough of the pungent smell of lavender, can escape to the vibrant, colorful market town of Apt. The town lies exactly between Avignon and Aix-en-Provence. The weekly market, held on Saturday, is famous in the area and has already been crowned the lofty classification of Marché classé de la France. Naturally, one can buy lavender soap here. Apt is most famous, however, in France and beyond, for its candied fruit. And then, of course, there are the sunflowers. No other of nature's motifs can claim to have achieved such world-renowned popularity for use in works of art as the sunflower. These tall, bright, colorful and healthy-inducing plants, even more possibly than lavender, are the emblem of the Provence. Van Gogh himself created a series of sunflower pictures. He wrote to his brother, Theo, regarding the optimism their strength gave him. Since then, these proud plants have had to act as models for millions of amateur artists. Vincent van Gogh spent almost 1.5 years in Arles, from the end of February 1888 to the beginning of May 1889, and depicted the city in many pictures. The citizens of the town were anything but pleased with the tragic, self-destructive genius. Nowadays, people would say that they mobbed him out of the city. It was only as late as 1987 when one of his iris pictures was sold at auction for $53.9 million, people started to remember the once banished artist. Since then, the locals have made a good living off his talent and their joint history, better than Van Gogh could have ever dreamed. With the hostile atmosphere from the locals and his mental visions, the omnipresent sunflowers must have often seemed to Van Gogh like the trumpets of Jericho or the trombones blasting out the Last Judgment. Colors have become an important part of our language. We see red. We go green with envy, we get a black eye, or simply see life through rose-tinted glasses.
Nearly all of the verbal images that we find today had their origins in the 18th and 19th century. This is a historic theory that lingers to this day. Since poets and writers are no longer the central, so to say, advocates of language, I strongly believe that journalists will use more and more technical terms rather than pictographic ones. In my opinion, this pictorial imagination of words will dwindle more and more in the future, and thus our language will lose a lot of quality. Mere words will never create such an amount of creativity and imagination as pictures.